Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you get in and get settled. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. For those of you who are just joining us, thanks so much for being here and joining the conversation. We're going to wait for just a tad bit longer to give folks a chance to hop on. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here, for attending the very important session on racial justice in sport, using sports as a platform to affect change. My name is Cynthia Edmonds, and I'm the fairly newly hired Senior Associate Athletics Director, and I oversee diversity, equity, inclusion, and organizational effectiveness here in the Athletics Department at the University of Maryland. I'm joined by my colleague, Jordan Luby.
Hi, everybody. Yep. As Cynthia said, my name is Jordan Luby. I am the Assistant AD for Marketing Strategy and Fan Experience at the University of Maryland. I've been here for a little over 8 years now, and I'm super excited for tonight's panel. It feels like for me, it's been a long time coming. So,
Jordan and I are both honored to welcome both our audience and our distinguished panelists, Dominique Foxworth, Zara Sadiq, David Steele, and Taylor Wilson. And we welcome all of you for what I believe will be an absolutely intriguing and informative learning experience. So thank you so much for being here. Before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan so he can quickly go over a few of the mechanics for our session this evening.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just want to say that the ultimate goal of this is that this webinar is discussion focused and participatory. So our panel is going to engage in a conversation and we want all attendees to do the same. As such, the chat feature will be on throughout the event, so feel free to take advantage of that. If you have a perspective on something that the panel has discussed that you think is worth sharing, please share it with the larger audience in the chat. If you have a question or discussion point that you want to make and have other audience members respond, do that as well. Of course, use the chat appropriately, and note that Cynthia and I aren't going to be monitoring it super closely. It's more for you guys to engage in a conversation. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask the panelists, the Q&A feature is going to be your best bet. We have several questions for the panelists that we will use to help steer the conversation over the next hour, but we also want to answer the questions that you all have. So if you have a question for the panel, please submit it through the Q&A function, and we'll answer them when and if appropriate throughout the panel. I can't promise we'll get to every single question, especially if we get a lot of them, but we will do our absolute best. We're also recording the session, so I wanted to make a particular note of that. I'm happy to share that recording with you afterwards if anybody is interested. So if so, feel free to reach out to me. My email is jluby@umd.edu. It's also listed on the staff directory on umterps.com, and I'm happy to send it to you. I think that's it in terms of mechanics. So I'm really excited about tonight. I'll turn it back over to Cynthia to get us started.
Thanks, Jordan. Before our panelists introduce themselves, I think it's important and appropriate to acknowledge that sports activism really has a long-standing history, really dating back to the late 1800s. And athletes have been activists for equality and justice, particularly centered around social identities of race and gender and sexuality. And because many have come before us, sports activism has really grown into this powerful movement for social, systemic, and behavioral change, still centered on the need for justice and humanity and equality. And so before we get started with where we are here now, I thought it was appropriate for us to just pause for a moment and acknowledge that there have been many before us, and we will continue to press on in this work. We are excited to open our session to our panelists who will share their own insights and perspectives on this important topic of sports activism. I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and to share a very brief bio, then we'll move on to questions. And Dominique, I'm going to ask that we start with you.
Sure. So most importantly, I'm a graduate of the fine University of Maryland. That is my proudest credential. And from there, went on to play professional football, at which point I was very active in social justice issues. We ran a campaign when I was president of the Players Association for gay rights and LGBTQ issues, which is probably a bit of a surprise coming from the National Football League, but it's something that we felt, or not the National Football League, but the players of the National Football League, but it's something that we felt was important. From there, I went on to business school and then went to work at the NBA Players Association. After that, I went to ESPN and now I yell on TV for money.
Thank you, Dominique, for that introduction. Zara, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Zara Sadiq. I'm currently a junior here at the University of Maryland and majoring in kinesiology in hopes of being a physical therapist one day. So we shall see. And I'm also currently president of NAACP at the University of Maryland.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. David, you're up next.
Thanks very much. I'm David Steele. I am a professional sports journalist, graduate of the University of Maryland. Way back when. I wrote for the Black Explosion and for the Diamondback while I was on campus. I have written over the years for the Sporting News, for Newsday, for the Baltimore Sun, San Francisco Chronicle. Matter of fact, next month is will mark 35 years in total as a professional in this business. And I'm also the co-author of Silent Gesture, the autobiography of Tommy Smith, the 1968 Olympic gold medalist who joined with John Carlos to do the protest for Black rights on the victory stand in Mexico City.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Taylor.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Taylor Wilson. I am a senior kinesiology student and softball student athlete here at Maryland. And I am also a community engagement subcommittee chair for the Big Ten Equality Coalition.
Wonderful. Welcome again to all of you. And thank you for being part of our panel this evening. Our first question is for each of you. And so can each of you tell us your story about why sports activism and racial justice are important to you and why you think this is an important topic that we should be discussing? And I will turn it to whoever wants to jump in first.
All right, well, I can go first. So, well, first of all, I'm Black, so that makes racial justice really important. And I think that's what I identify with as at first before anything else is I feel like I experienced this world as a Black person before a man or a Terp or a resident of Washington, D.C. or anything other than that, or even before I identify with my family. It's like the world that I experience is that of a Black man. So I never feel like that race is not a part of my experience, the way that I'm viewed, the way that I'm treated, and the way that I see other people and the way that I behave. So social justice was kind of something that's always been important. I always recognized from the time I was a kid that people were treated differently and things weren't fair. So it's never not been a case for me. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's a long history for athletes in taking on social causes, particularly in the Black community, because Howard Bryant wrote a book called The Heritage that I thought did a really good job of discussing how some of the first people to gain any level of financial security or any level of power in America that were Black were athletes. And they got some celebrity and some fame and some influence, and it was incumbent on them to bring light to the issues that were concerning them and the people who look like them and the people that are most important to them. So that's a legacy that kind of exists throughout sports. And I know that David talked about the '68 Olympics. It's something that I remember hearing about and seeing when I was a kid, and always aspired to have that legacy. Went all the way up until, I think in Howard Bryant's book, he talks about it kind of stopping with OJ, because OJ was like the first one to make the crossover all the way in through Jordan being kind of the milquetoast guy that made it palatable for white America to accept a Black athlete. But it's obviously picked back up now. And I think that I think it's more difficult for me to imagine a world where this would not be important to me than it is for me to figure out how to explain how it is important to me or how I feel this particular obligation.
Yeah, and I appreciate your starting point is really your lived experience and how your lived experience really transitioned into what informed your activism as a student athlete. Thank you. What about the rest of our panelists?
I can go next. So like what Mr. Foxworth said, I feel like all of us are of African descent. And I'm Black and Indian. I'm also a woman, and I'm also Muslim. I like to call it the trifecta. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I feel like social justice is a part of my life. I was already born into it, if that makes sense, in this society. And then regarding sports, I feel like a lot of people underplay and don't really notice how big of a platform sports is. I feel like it unites not people just nationally, but globally. People from, I don't know, Japan or Greece can all love soccer, So I feel like sports has such this huge platform where they could reach everybody because all eyes are on them. So using sports in order to not necessarily push an agenda, but to speak up for the right thing, should be something, integral for the fight against racial injustice.
I agree completely with what's been said. Being a Black woman, sometimes, when you walk into a room, the first thing you enters is your Blackness, not necessarily the fact that I'm a softball student athlete or a woman. And so I think that's, like everyone said, is where my fight for social justice has come from. Having to navigate this world as a young Black woman, especially now, is something that is inescapable and has been obviously long before me. In terms of sports, I think the emphasis that globally and specifically in America, our society puts on sports and the performance of athletes plays a critical role in our fight for social justice, as we know athletes are people, which I think sometimes is lost, and we'll probably touch on that later. But it's definitely important that we continue to humanize athletes and listen to what they have to say when they're not performing in their athletic arenas.
For myself, I feel like this is all I've ever known. All I've ever been aware of is the presence and the importance of athletes and their visibility, and the struggles and the obstacles and just the fights that we've had to go through as Black people. And I mean, literally from when I was little. As Dominique, mentioned, I remember, one of my original memories as a kid was watching the Alis, watching always knowing about the Tommy Smith and the John Carloses, growing up watching Hank Aaron, fight, his battle to break Babe Ruth's record, and what effect that had on this country and what effect that this country's reaction had on him. It was the sort of thing that sort of drove me into doing this for a living. I wanted to be involved in sports one way or another. And I found out that sort of that writing was my entry into it. And once I decided to do that, I knew that I didn't want to ever restrict myself just to wins and losses and, balls and strikes and stats and records and things like that. It was about the people involved, and knowing that this was an opportunity to tell the stories and use this platform to effect as much change as I possibly can, and to recognize other people that were trying to affect change as well. So it just feels like, I don't even feel like it was a calling. It just feels like this is what I've always done, even just as a fan, just as a kid, just as being just a person in this country, in society, and in this skin.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I hear from all of you is that one of the things that binds us is that this is part of our being, right? We don't know any other way. And so help me understand how each of you help folks from majoritized communities engage with us in this activism, right? For folks where this isn't part of their lived experience, where it's not just something that they know, where they've had different experiences. How do you engage others to be part of this activism and be part of the cause?
I'll start. I think specifically now, as it pertains to being a student athlete and playing softball, a sport that is overwhelmingly white, I think I have a unique platform in that most of the people I spend most of my time with are of a majoritized community. And I think our coach has done a great job of providing opportunities for us to have the conversations that are sometimes challenging. And when people say they have challenging conversations, they're usually awkward and people don't have them. And for me, it's awkward being one of 3 Black girls on my team to say, hey, everyone, this is happening to people who look like me, and I'm very upset. And for good reason, because a lot of people see things a lot of different ways. And so it's not just awkward for people who aren't of the group that's being oppressed or that is in need of help. It's also awkward for us to have to speak up and say, hey, this is hurting me and I need your help because I can't do it by myself. And so I think just being vulnerable in those moments and speaking your truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is critical to having people who are in your circle or maybe not, but of privilege in situations understand and want to help you.
I found that, like, obviously I'm very appreciative that you're willing to do that and proud that you are that person. But I found myself over this summer just getting angry, honestly, like that ain't my job. And like, not that you shouldn't have to, or not that you shouldn't if you don't want to, but it feels frustrating when, and I've gotten angry and gotten arguments with some of my Black colleagues because it feels like what happens often is they're looking for a Black face to make them feel better. They want to put a tally and be able to point back to whenever they have this conversation. Like, no, I talked to my Black friend about it. My Black friend told me all about it. Like nothing's actually been accomplished. So I've had a couple of heated exchanges when it's like, you're just giving them cover, and like the work needs to be done. They need to do the work. It's not our responsibility or obligation to fix a problem or several problems that we haven't created. That being said, it also like, it affects us most. So like I feel like having 2 conversations where I'm talking to white people. This is fun for you, isn't it, Jordan? Also talking to white people like, hey, go do the work, get out of my face. It's not my job to make you feel better. And also talking to Black people who have some success and some reach and saying like, hey, like this is not the way. And I've had those heated conversations also where there are Black people who have been successful and made a lot of money and view it as a product of their own hard work. And rather than wanting to attack the system and fix it, they're like, no, they want to attack the people who aren't succeeding in the system and say, no, you just got to work hard like I did. And like those conversations are stressful. And I always end up feeling like angry and like nothing has really been accomplished on either side. So that being said, I will say this one positive note to lift us back up is that it often feels like in order to have an impact that you have to like kneel for the national anthem, or you have to protest in the streets, or you have to get hit with pepper spray or something. But that's not necessarily true. I think like David's obviously been writing a lot longer than I have, but I write profiles for ESPN, and I talk about Black athletes on TV. And I think having people reframe the way that we look at Black athletes and give them the benefit of the doubt that we extend to so many white athletes when we're discussing them, like that has an impact that I think isn't easily calculated, but it changes the way people perceive them. So in the long history of professional sports, it's always been white men covering athletes, no matter what they look like, and then they let their biases seep into their coverage, and that coverage seeps into the minds of kids who are watching it, people are watching, and they grow up thinking that because someone says this or does this, that they are a bad person, or that they have no justification for their action, or that the coach is always right, or the general manager is always right, or the athlete is just a whining, complaining billionaire. Like having the opportunity to combat that aggressively is like a small thing that doesn't feel like I wouldn't go to the leaders of Black Lives Matter and say, but I called them out when they called Deshaun Watson selfish. Like it's not a big thing like that, but I do think it has an impact trying to be able to frame the way that we look at athletes and talk about athletes.
Yeah, and you use the word anger. I would add the word exhaustion to that, right? And I think many folks don't see that there is a lot that we carry, right? Historically, over generations, and being in the position of having to continue to do the heavy lifting, it's not only exhausting, it continues to cause trauma for a community that's already traumatized. David, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, that's such a good phrase for it, is, doing all the heavy lifting. And I was like nodding my way all the way through what Dominique was saying about sort of talking to two audiences. That literally feels like all I've ever done. Whenever I write about these things or get an opportunity to talk about them, it feels like, I'm talking to an audience that is saying, oh, yeah, right, finally, yeah, I get it. I hear what you're saying. I understand. If finally somebody who gets it and is expressing it and is putting it out there, that's so rare, you don't see or hear it enough, and it's about time. And this could be a big step for us, things like that. And this whole other audience, which makes up really the overwhelming majority, telling you, why are you talking about this? Or, why are you bringing this up? Why can't this just be fun? Why can't this be my escape? Why
This
does
is
it
my
have to be,
entertainment.
I
Just
can't, this is
entertainment.
where I
Just
go to get away
entertainment.
from politics and strife and the race issue and things like that. And it's like the idea that you have to like go back to like basics and say, these are people that you're talking about, and the very people that we're describing and everything, I mean, they're going through stuff that just, it isn't that hard for you to sort of connect on that very, very basic level. And it just always seems to be fighting an uphill battle to sort of reach those people. And I'll just sort of use an example from the book, and I'm not here to just show the book the entire hour or anything like that, so excuse me for doing this. But when Silent Gesture came out, a lot of the Black readers and a pretty decent segment of the white audience as well was saying, thank goodness, it's about time. I'm so glad we heard his voice. I'm so glad we got this on the record. And yet there was a whole lot of other people who just, the only thing they got out of it was, he sounds so bitter. He sounds so angry. He sounds so, why isn't he appreciative of this? Why isn't he, grateful for that? Why does he have to sort of strike that tone? And I'm just like, he's just telling you a story. That's all it is. And it's a very terrifying, harrowing story, one that dragged him through hell and back in a lot of cases. And, where he's had to really question himself on a lot of levels and try to find out, how did he want to really express this, first through just speaking out back when he was in college, and then doing the protest at the Olympics, and then just continuing to do what he does what he's done for the last 50 years or so. And people just sort of look at that as like, why did you have to lay it? Why couldn't you just be happy to win a gold medal and just walk off and wave your flag and be happy? And, so it's trying to speak to that audience and get them to understand it's really, really stressful. I mean, this beard might be all black if it wasn't for, having to hear that and experience that all these years. And I feel terrible because we have these two young athletes here on this panel. And as Zara, I've read about your sports background, so I know about it. Y'all got to carry that burden around as well, especially in overwhelmingly white spaces where you have to explain yourself and justify your existence and tell people why you deserve to live and breathe and be and have all the rights that we were born with, instead of them being something we have to either ask permission for or fight for our lives to get. So
yeah. I find the language around justice peculiar when folks choose to make that narrative about politics, because this isn't about politics. This is about a humanitarian thing, right? This is about our humanity. Yeah. Sorry, you look like you were nodding. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I've been itching to say a few things.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want you itching. Go ahead.
So let me start with the first thought I had. I think, Ms. Edmonds, I think you brought it up, talking about like this has been trauma that's been passed down generation to generation. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. Like, back in, slavery started in like 1600s, it ended in 1800s, and then people were just free, with no mental help, no help at all, no therapy, no nothing. And slavery was a traumatic experience. You weren't taught about all of it in school, but from what we've done on our own research, we know how terrible it was. So those practices of what our ancestors knew were just passed down from generation to generation. That mental, like, post-traumatic slave syndrome, if you will, has been passed on to people in today's world. And I think that also feeds into the implicit bias that I feel all of us have. And I mentioned implicit bias because I believe Mr. Steele brought it up, with, like, for example, ESPN, like, announcers You're describing like, these athletes, especially like African American athletes, as strong, power machines, this, that, and the third. And then people are listening to this and like, oh yeah, like he's strong, this, et cetera, et cetera. And that also, that kind of feeds into the back of your head when you're walking down the street and you just see an average Black person, and then that's what you envision subconsciously. So I do feel like it's not just like, talking about specifically athletes. Those who are viewing it are also viewing Black people like that in general, seeing them as power machines and less like human beings. Ooh, that rhymed. But anyway, that was that was another point I wanted to add. And there was something else. If I remember, I'll make sure to bring it up.
I think you raised a really interesting point about the trauma that gets passed down, from slavery. And so generationally, while we are passing trauma, folks from majoritized communities pass privilege from generation to generation, right? And so I feel like a lot of the reaction that I see is oftentimes about them and fear, right? Fear of letting go of that privilege, right? And so unpacking that becomes intense. David and Dominique, both of you talked about the importance of telling story, right? And voice, giving voice to things. One of the questions I have is, have any of you actually had an experience where you were expected to sacrifice or silence your own voice in activism? And what was the cost? What is the cost of silencing voices?
Oh, there are a lot of examples of that throughout throughout my time as a sports writer, because there's always been this constant push and pull. Like the overwhelming majority of the time, you're one of a very small number of Black faces in your newsroom, and an even smaller number in the sports department. And they're aiming for an audience that is, they don't want to hear this. They want to hear anything but this. They will fight back in so many ways against hearing this. When I was with Sporting News a few years ago, and Kaepernick began to protest for games, I wanted to write about it all the time. I did write about it a lot. One of the things about how this business is at this point is that so much is determined by page views, how much traffic, how many clicks, things like that. And that was something, and that was a topic that generated a lot of traffic. A lot of people were reading those stories. Everything that anybody was writing or saying about what Colin Kaepernick was doing was generating a lot of traffic. So that was going to be a lot of money, a lot of style signs, things like that. But I was writing what I felt needed to be said, needed to be understood about that. And yet, and still, after a certain point, there were some subtle and some not very subtle hints that I would hear from my superiors and my supervisors at times, saying, maybe not write about that all that often. Maybe kind of ease back from that. And there really wasn't anybody else that was really all that eager or willing to take these topics on, really to take them on directly, or take them on outside of just the context of football into the bigger picture that he clearly was taking on. I felt that was my responsibility to do that because nobody else really wanted to do it. And yet when I did take it on, there was a lot of, pressures that were coming from different places to not do that. And after a while, you find yourself making a choice. If you want to keep saying, you want to keep suggesting, recommending pitching stories and being told, no, why don't you write about the matchup for this weekend, or, what the point spread is or something like that, or what the injury list is or whatever. Or do you want to, just fight that fight over and over and over and over again? And so, I don't know if I ever reached a point where I really, felt satisfied with how much or what I did about it. I mean, I feel like I never write enough about it, to be perfectly honest. But there were a lot of people. I mean, I would get the hate mail, I would get the messages, I would get things like that. I mean, not from my college and all, but just all that. Also, and yet, and still, there was this sense that you just need to back off. You just need to ease back. You need to sort of pull back a little bit and, quote unquote, just get back to football. And that's something that almost never goes away when you're taking on topics like this. And I'm sure it's only accelerated in the last few years.
Yeah. David, tell me, so I hear the resistance, right, that you were met with while you were fulfilling a duty that you have to write about these very important topics. What did that do to you? What did those efforts of others resisting, what did it do to you as a practitioner, but also as a human being?
It hurts. It really hurts. I mean, people very often don't hold back about what they feel about you and about everybody who looks like you or sounds like you or is in support of you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're really literally torn between, I need to do this even more and I need to walk away from this business completely and just go sit and stare out a window at the sunset for the next 10 years or whatever. You really wonder if what you're doing is really worth it, worth the stress it's going to put on you. You don't know if you want to, transfer that stress to other people, even though you know that it's something that you need to share, but it's a really hurtful, painful thing to have to share it with people, even the ones you care the most about, your friends and your family and things like that. And there's still that responsibility that you feel as this person who took this on willingly for a career and as a cause, to continue to do it and to fight through, tough it out more or less, to continue to do these sort of things. And
which is diminishing.
Yeah,
which is diminishing.
It is. And, you try to encourage others to do it and you sometimes see that really sometimes they're right. And then you get really, really happy when you see other people that are engaged in it. I mean, literally, say, turning on the TV and seeing Dominique do an essay about it, or a bunch of people on First Take or whatever network it is that's seen it, or to open up the Diamondback or see whatever else, see what's going on and see a Black face on there, or you see a story about whatever it is that people are doing on campus, in the conference or at a game. I mean, I saw the clip of the players taking a knee for the game. I think it was right after after they stormed the Capitol last month. I feel like, they can correct me if I'm confusing the two, but the basketball team took a knee before the game started. And I was just like, we're not alone in this. And I felt great. And that's the sort of thing that keeps you going, to see others out there doing it. But sometimes it feels like we're all in this really far-flung network and we're reaching for ways to stay connected, where sometimes the people who are like, closest to you, sitting next to you in the press box, sitting next to you in the dugout, or working with you in the locker room or clubhouse or something like that, who are the ones who are against you and really would rather see you just be quiet. Yeah. So it's really kind of a constant tug and pull.
Thank you for that. Just because you can carry it doesn't mean it's not heavy. Yeah. And it's no wonder, right, that you turn to anger, right? And so Dominique, let me turn it over to you, because it looks like you were leaning in and wanting to say something about this.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I forgot exactly how you worded the original question, but I think it was something to the effect of like, do you feel the pressure to not engage in these things, or not?
Has your voice been silenced? Has your activism been silenced? And what's the cost?
I think, and obviously the young women, I'm sure have probably felt it at a multiple of how I felt it, but I feel like, yes. And I don't know if it's even activism, but it's just your true self. And I think that's something that all people can relate to, no matter your race or gender or sexual orientation. I think we all understand that when you go into certain environments, you give up some of what you actually want to do or actually want to say in order to exist in those environments. And it's just multiplied for certain people. So I'm sure that people who are in the majority or the most privileged people that are participating in this right now would recognize that feeling, where something, their boss says something to them that they don't like, and they bite their tongue. And that happens once every so often. But imagine every day, that's the feeling that you feel, is that the person that you have to be to some degree is not your full self. The things that you have to abide are not things that you feel comfortable abiding. And the things that you have to nod and smile to are things that actually hurt you deeply. So yeah, I mean, it's not just in my profession. It's like all the way throughout my life, things like that have, or that pressure that is probably to some degree self-imposed, like that exists. So I don't understand a world where that's not a thing. And so I think, what does it cost is an interesting question, because there's a guilt, I think, that you carry, particularly if you're like successful by like traditional measures and financially and those things. There's some level of responsibility, obligation, and guilt that you carry. And I think about this often working at ESPN, where like part of the money that pays me is money that comes from college sports, which like I believe to be wholly unethical. And like those are things that we all, and I'm sure many of us, can look at different parts of our life and understand the compromises that we make to live the life that we live. But I'll shut up now, because I think that obviously these young women probably experience what I experienced, but then on top of it, like, you're also a woman in these environments.
Yeah, Zara and Taylor, I'd love to hear from you on this if you have a response to offer. I am oftentimes really concerned about, our youngins, right, our student athletes, because as a student athlete, it's very easy to rep your sport, to rep your institution, right, to the extent that you almost lose your own sense of identity. And so this, sense of losing voice is critically important for us, right? And so have you all had this experience, and what has that been like for you?
I've definitely had that experience. Excuse me. I think a lot of it presents itself in how I show up in spaces, specifically on this campus. I'm from Prince George's County, Maryland, which is a predominantly Black community, and I go to school in Prince George's County, Maryland, but it's a completely different world. This campus, it does not reflect the demographics of PG County at all. And so being a student athlete and being in spaces dominated by white student athletes by nature of the school, it does affect how I use my voice, not verbally always, but how I show up. Do I wear hoops when I'm coming to Xfinity Center? Do I wear my box braids? Right, exactly. And I think a lot of that actually is internalized. I know for me, if I switch hairstyles the next day when I come to practice, I'm like, please, y'all, don't say anything. Like, I know my hair was really long and now it's in a bun. Like, we see it. And it's just, I think a word that's been used a lot is exhausting. And it's exhausting to have to think, is how I'm presenting myself going to be perceived a certain way? Am I the only Black person that these people know or will come in contact with this or have come in contact with? And so just having to constantly look at the ways you present yourselves doesn't necessarily stifle the activism, but I think being Black is a rebellious act. I think how Black people, specifically Black women, choose to present themselves through their hair, through their clothing, through their style is very important to how we exist in the world. And so being in a space where whiteness is the dominant, race, for lack of a better word, it is a lot of how I think when I dress, when I do, et cetera, being a student athlete in athletic spaces, but also on campus, being surrounded by white students.
Yeah. So I hear you saying, in addition to voice, right, really having to be concerned and hyper attentive to your own representation of self, right? Yeah.
I'd love to jump in real quick, because I think something that David wrote for us in athletics a few months ago speaks to this conversation. I wanted to read what David wrote, and then I think, Zara, you can answer this question, and I'd love the other panelists' thoughts. I think it fits really well with what we're talking about, but David wrote a piece for a quarterly magazine that we release now called One Maryland Magazine, and he wrote a piece called The Last Word, which spoke to athlete activism. And he said, the notion of being seen and cheered for on the field, but not heard off of it, has become so internalized that the athletes often silence themselves. So I just think that was like, Taylor, I think you sort of spoke directly to that. And that really stuck with me when reading that piece. So Zara, if you want to maybe comment on that and give your experience, and I'd love to hear what the other panelists think about that also.
Yeah, sure. I think, going off what Taylor said, like, I feel like my whole life I've been silenced or, assumed to be silenced. Like, I went to schools in predominantly white spaces. So I was the only one who looked like me for a really long time. So, I would always get, your handful of microaggressions from parents, teachers, other students. But like as a child, like you don't really notice that, until, I was called pretty for a Black girl, or do I wear my hijab in the shower? So, and again, like that's tiring. Like I'm tired. At one point I just started rolling my eyes and walking away because it's not my responsibility. HR didn't tell me that it was my responsibility in life to tell people I deserve to exist. And I'm not everybody's encyclopedia. If you want some information, it's called Google. So that's one thing, like holding that responsibility, like I shouldn't have to do that. And then I think around high school, I finally realized, like, I don't have to be anything other than myself for anybody else. And that in itself is hard too. And I also wanted to, talk about the repercussions of like not being silent. And I feel like from a Black woman's perspective, you have that angry Black woman stereotype. You get questioned, all these microaggressions, you come back like, stop. And then you're labeled angry, you're labeled ghetto. Like Taylor said, if I'm going to a formal event, if I'm going out somewhere, I have to make sure I don't look too Black so I don't get deemed uneducated or just judged upon from the jump. And then from an athletic perspective, I think the repercussions of keeping your voice silent or speaking up is, I guess, fear. I think fear would be a large aspect of it. Like, for example, I think this was brought up earlier regarding like John Carlos and Tommie Smith in the 1968 Olympics, holding the Black Power fist up. Now, today, when we look back, we're like, yo, those are activists, they're heroes, they spoke up. But back in the day, they was getting, threats, hate mail, just they got their medals taken away. Colin Kaepernick, he got fired. Like,
I was gonna say not so much back in the day, but yeah.
yeah, not that one, the first one though. But like in the moment, there's a lot of negative, I guess, repercussions that come with speaking up. So I guess it's like you have this little scale, like, should I speak about the right thing or should I not? And, protect not only myself, but my family, my loved ones, my job security. So I feel like from an athletic perspective, like especially regarding NBA, NFL, et cetera, I feel like there is more at stake, if that makes sense. But it's also sad because I feel like talking about racial injustice, racial inequity is not a political stance, which I think a lot of, I guess, viewers deem it as. And it's not a political stance, it's whether I have the right to be alive or not. Police are shooting us in the street for being Black, for those implicit biases that we're being fed on the news and just this white patriarchy we live in today. So it's not a political stance, it's fighting for my life.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. Do any of you want to touch on that? Because that Zara, what you just said is really powerful.
I would like to. I completely agree with that point. I think the topic that we're talking about now, Black Lives Mattering, it has to be depoliticized. It's not a political issue, like everyone's been saying, it's a humanitarian issue. And I think when I hear comments that further dehumanize Black lives as it pertains to athletics, I'm aghast, appalled. When I forgot the person's name, but when the reporter told LeBron to shut up and dribble, I was like, so clearly you all are missing the point, because you're telling a Black man to shut up and play basketball. That was almost the complete representation of what I hear when people tell athletes not to kneel, not to protest, not to sit out for games. You're telling athletes not to play a sport, but you're not realizing the people that are performing the act. These are human beings. And so I think a lot of times people hide behind politics as a way to dismiss what's being said or to ignore the fact that these are critical events in the history of this country and the history of the social justice movement that's been going on for years. I think when we look at Colin Kaepernick, people dismissed him incredibly hiding behind politics, saying he was kneeling against the troops or was disrespecting the flag. And he came out and said, that is not what I'm doing. That's not what this is about. And yet that narrative is still being pushed today, 4 or 5 years later, after that clarification was made. And so I think politicizing the fact that Black Lives Matter is an easy way out.
Taylor, I had another quote from you that I think you sort of just spoke on, so I wanted to read it because I thought it was powerful and it stuck with me. But on a piece that you wrote that we published on umturf.com and the University of Maryland, I think Digest or whatever it is, published, you said, racism will not just go away with time. Injustices against Black people won't magically stop if we pretend we don't see them. And that made me think of Shut Up and Dribble, right? Like that's a space that a lot of people will say, hey, and we talked about this earlier, like, this is where I go for entertainment. This is for fun, but, and this is where I go for fun, keep politics out of sports. That to me speaks to what you just said of feeling like that person was trying to silence LeBron, his whole human, as opposed to him just as a basketball player. So I thought that was super powerful, and I wanted to share that.
And I'm curious what reaction you all have. I'm sorry, Taylor, go ahead.
I just think to that point, it's very two-sided when people say to keep politics out of sport. When you look at the American sports spectacle, specifically NBA, NFL, and MLB, major sporting events, before the game, you hear the national anthem, you see the flag presented grandiosely across the field. Those are all forms of nationalism that promote political agenda. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but that is a blatant example of politics being in sport. And so if you're going to say, don't kneel, don't protest, don't do this, are you also for removing the flag from games? Are you for removing the national anthem? Because those are also forms of politics that we see in sport. And I don't really hear people making the comments about shutting up and dribbling or stop the kneeling, saying the same thing about the other forms of nationalism or politics that we see every time we turn on a sporting event.
So I oftentimes hear folks speak of confusion, not understanding the damage that it causes when folks make comments like, why can't you just play the sport? Why can't I just be in the space where I'm entertained? Why don't you go out there and, take all of the anger or exhaustion or whatever adjective we want to use, take it out on the sport, go out there and win. What response do you have for folks who may have that sentiment?
If I could jump in real quick, and it's so fun because you're asking sort of a really close version of something I was thinking about, and I wanted to ask the rest of the panelists, because one of the things that I always think about is, one, what you said is like asking, why can't you just be just pour it at your sport and just leave all that other stuff aside. What always has stuck to me, and it has stuck to me more and more lately, is that athletes are always told, well, we are, and Black athletes and other athletes like that, are always asked that they should be grateful and thankful for everything they have been, quote unquote, given. Whether it's
more trauma.
Right, exactly. It's like, you're like going back to Tommy Smith and John Carlos, it's like we let you run for our country in the Olympics, when it was Ali, we let you become, heavyweight champion of the world. We gave you all these riches and on this level, it's like we quote unquote gave you a scholarship. We gave you all this visibility. We let you into our university. Why can't you just be happy with that and not bring up all this other stuff? Why can't you just leave us alone about that and just be happy that we have allowed you to do all this? And so I'm curious about what the other panelists, when they encounter that, because you encounter it a whole lot more than I do. So I'm wondering what y'all, how you deal with that.
And it's a deep level of dehumanization.
Yeah, that's how it feels.
I can go. I think the first thought that I thought when you said that comment was, at the end of the day, when the game is over and I go home, I still have to fear getting pulled over. I still have to fear my father or my brother getting shot for no reason. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand it. Like black people live with a lot of anxiety. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to me about, like, I wake up sometimes and I just fear, my father or my mother, my sister, my brother, like, and that's a fear that white people will never understand. never in their life. So that's one thing. And the fact that people are like, be grateful for what we've given you, be grateful for this, that, and the third. First of all, Black people really came up. We really built ourselves as a community from slavery to now. After everything that's been pinned against us, slavery, Jim Crow, the prison system being legal slavery, all of that, and we're here, and you're telling us be grateful because you gave me a scholarship to go to school that I should be going to for free. That's another panel, another conversation for another week. But it just makes my blood boil. Like, I feel like white people can never fully understand what it's like, the Black experience is like. Like, I hate when, they say, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, just work harder. I worked hard. The system is built for you. It's built against me. So I have to work twice as hard to get half of what you had. And that's what they don't understand. And I think that's where like the exhaustion and tiredness comes from. It's like, why do I have to explain this to you when it is in your face? But, they just don't see it. And I feel like it's not our job, but we need to tell them, and they also need to put in the work to like at least try to empathize, try to sympathize, and address the systemic racism that is in every aspect of this society. I'm done.
I mean, I think that's you made a lot of really important points, and I think it's important to understand that the racism doesn't just hurt Black people, and I think we focus on us because we're us and we experience it, but it's bad for them too. Like, it is bad for our society as a whole to have our society divided in that particular way. And I understand, like, I feel guilty even saying this, but like, I understand the impulse to reject that if you're a white person. Because in saying that, it feels like whatever you've gotten, you haven't earned. And if you don't have some great life that you feel like you can be proud of, then you feel like, well, they ain't talking to me because my life is not perfect. But I think that finding a way, and you're right, I think we all agree on this, like, it's not our responsibility, but we also feel like if we don't do it, then who? But like, finding a way to communicate to them that this ain't like the problem. The issues are those that affect us most immediately, but they affect our whole society as a whole. Like, they affect the way that we are viewed by other countries. They affect the way that we pass policy. They affect the politicians that we elect and the choices that they make that impact the poor. Because the poor is disproportionately Black, oftentimes policies that are meant to impact all people who are in bad situations are rejected because of the fear and anger and disgust that some people have towards Black people. So understanding that it is not only about improving what we have and the access that we have, it's also about improving the society that we live in. Like, I think it's an important thing to talk about. Yeah. And I also, like, given that I played football and I made a lot of money playing football, broke white people certainly don't like hearing from me that things are tough. And trust me, they don't have a problem telling me that. But always think back to Chris Rock joke that he talked about his neighborhood, and the students on the panel are too young to remember this, but I'm sure David will know it. But he talked about his neighborhood was Mary J. Blige, Jay-Z, him were the Black people in the neighborhood, and then all other people in the neighborhood was just regular old pull your tooth dentists. Like, they didn't invent the tooth or nothing. And like, I think that's a perfect microcosm, because the same thing happens on my street. Like, my street is a bunch of people who, like, I mean, they're like lawyers or like real estate developers. Like, they're doing fine, but like, it's when I get to know them or talk to them, they talk about how their parents did X, Y, and Z, had millions of dollars, started this, and their parents before them, their grandparents did all this other stuff, and their grandparents, or they went to college where their grandparents went to college, and they didn't have to pay because of relationships, and they helped them buy their house, and they, like, all these things that I'm looking around like, and they probably, well, I can't put words in their mouth or thoughts in their head, but on some subconscious level, I move in this neighborhood when I'm in my late 20s. They're all in their late 30s and 40s, looking at this young Black dude who played football to get in this neighborhood, and it's like, hey, you don't belong here. And I'm looking at them like, I had to move mountains to get in here. You don't belong here. Like, if anybody who doesn't belong here, it ain't me. Like I had to overcome so much to get here. So like that is something that always like is in the back of my mind because I carry with me a great deal of insecurity about it. Like it's part of the reason why I wanted to go to a big fancy business school. So when I'm at these little stupid neighborhood parties, when they're like, "So what do you do?" I don't have to say, I play football and be ashamed of it. It's like, I went to the same fancy place you did. I survived there too. And on top of that, because I'm Black, I also was great at this other thing. And what do you do? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you raise a terrific point and making sure we don't lose sight of the importance of it's not just advancing division. This is really about building up humankind, right? Building up society, right? For the greater good of all. Believe it or not, we are close to time. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm actually going to ask that all of you weigh in on this. Help the audience understand what actions can be taken to be sure that the range of our audience, student athletes, leaders, coaches, fans, what can folks do to get more involved around racial justice efforts and activism without seeming performative?
First of all, you can pay Miss Sadiq's tuition. Let's go ahead and get that out the way.
First thing on the agenda, please. First thing.
I mean, outside of that, I don't care if it seems performative. Like I'm not a person who necessarily cares what your motivation is. If you want to get some snaps or a pat on the back, if that's what you need to do a good thing, more power to you. But I don't think it's actually that hard to learn. I think the most difficult thing to do is to actually give up something, to sacrifice something. And that whatever it is that you can sacrifice, be it time or whatever privilege you have or access, and be conscious. Like we all have power in our own ways, big and small. So like if you have an opportunity to hire somebody, it's not always easy. And I think we hear this often. It's like, particularly in high profile positions, that there aren't a lot of Black candidates in the pool. Like it's not always easy to find the person that you need for a particular job. It's not always easy to get the opportunities to the people that are marginalized. So I think those are the things, like when you have a chance, try to view everything through the prism of race, because we don't have a choice.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. I want people to just to listen to us, which is a big leap for a lot of people, and which is a really big barrier for a lot of people in the things that we do. But also hear us. Don't just wait till the words stop or the gesture stops or we stand back up or we go back inside or something like that. But really hear what we're saying, hear watch what we're doing, hear our perspective, understand our perspective. Don't center yourself in everything. Don't automatically start defending yourself and say, well, that's not this, that's not that. Don't start thinking about your feelings. Don't start thinking about your hard scrabble life that you led leading up to this, things like that. Hear what I'm saying, see what I'm writing, see what Dominique is saying, see what Zara and Taylor are doing and saying, recognize them when you see us, and know that we're not here just to aggravate you. We're not here to irritate you. We're not here to destroy your happiness. We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to take what we're entitled to. I think a lot of people can understand entitlement. They live entitlement. But I mean, we were born with the right to live. I mean, Zara said it as I could not top the way that she said it. But, we should not have to negotiate for our lives every breathing, waking moment of every single day. Hear us, understand us, view us as the people, the neighbors, the friends, the colleagues, or whatever that we are. Don't just tune us out. Don't just think about us in terms of whatever you're thinking about and whatever you feel like you have to do to protect yourself. Think about us as people, and don't think about what is the right way to do it. Don't do it at a football game because that's not right. That's not fair. That won't get it done. It's like, hey, if you're going to do it at a football game or a softball game or a volleyball game or whatever it is, we're doing it for a reason. If you hear us, then start listening to us. That's the way we got through to you. Now listen to us, hear us, and then do something about it.
Thank you.
I agree so much with what's been said. I think ultimately it's going to come down to sacrifice, as was mentioned, time, effort, all of the things that make people uncomfortable and give up a little bit of that privilege. Pay Black people what they're worth. Listen to Black people and listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. If a Black person is telling you their true lived experience, don't listen and try to formulate a response in the back of your head. Listen to understand and empathize and realize where this person is coming from. And I also think that if you're a coach, recruit Black athletes intentionally, seek out Black talent, minoritized talent, because it's out there. It exists. I promise you it exists. And just really be intentional about educating yourself. I think, like Zara mentioned, Google is free. Don't go to your local Black person and say, hey, how do I combat racism? When you have Twitter, you have social media, you have plentiful resources, especially after this summer, to educate yourself. And it's not our responsibility or a burden to do that for you. And so I really think it comes to wanting to do the work. We can't make you do the work, and we can't solve racism as Black people. It's going to come down to white people and people with privilege sacrificing some of that so that we can all ultimately achieve equality and, more importantly, live in an equitable society.
Thank you, Taylor. Zara, last piece of advice.
I think one of the main goals is to really flip the status quo. Like, I feel like now, especially I think beginning of 2020, it really started, at least it hit me, that like, we can't ignore the elephant in the room anymore. It can't be swept under the rug. Like, it's here. Like, we gonna have to talk about it, whether it's today, tomorrow, the next day, it's gonna be talked about. So I feel like having those conversations, not just, in like panels like this or like informal events and stuff like that, but having those conversations with your family, your friends, guiding people to resources that, they need to, just know to interact with all types of people. I really do think that's one of the biggest steps, to have those uncomfortable conversations. And it's also, not our job to make, you comfortable. And by you, I mean like the oppressor comfortable. It's not my job. We've been oppressed our whole lives. I'm sorry, we're going to have that conversation. So I do think starting small, starting at home, they say charity starts at home. This ain't charity, but you have to start with who you know, and then it's going to spread. And then hopefully we can flip that status quo.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Jordan, I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for tonight, and your perspective and your thoughts. Obviously, I just sat here most of the time and I was getting an education myself, and I appreciate you guys for that. I do think it's important to note that, Zara, you got to pop off Zara in the chat. So I think that's good news. Anyway, I thought it was an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you guys taking the time, and all the audience for being here. Also, just want to thank athletics for allowing me to help do this. It means a lot to be somewhere that allows us to have these conversations. And also the DC Alumni Network, thank you to you guys for helping us promote and market this thing. I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to send the recording of this to anybody who wants it. So email me at jluby@umd.edu, or you can just find my contact information on the umturks.com staff directory. And again, just thank you guys so much for being a part of this, and I'll turn it back to Cynthia to close out the conversation.
Thanks, Jordan. And Jordan, I have to thank you for doing such a great job putting all of this together. So my thanks to you. I'd also like to echo the thanks that Jordan offered, and especially thanks to our audience for joining us this evening. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I'm always grateful for those who are just brave, right? And interested in sharing their own voices. It means so much. So my sincerest thanks to Dominique and Zara and David and Taylor for being present, for being brave, for sharing your voice with us this evening. And I hope that our audience walks away with a little bit more understanding and a little bit more curiosity and a little bit more empathy, more than what you did when you entered this conversation. That's really important, I think. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to get to all of the questions. I see that folks were active in the chat. We're so happy that you engaged with us in that way. Please let us know if there are other conversations that you'd like us to consider within the span of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really important to us. We'd love to hear from you. My contact information is cedmonds@umd.edu. Jordan mentioned that you can find both of us in the directory of our staff listing. We went over by a few minutes, so I'm grateful that you all continue to stay on. Once again, thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your evening.